There's a lot of information about ADHD out there, and it's not all great information. I mean, some of it's pretty good and some of it's okay, but there's also a lot of information that's really sort of not okay. And as people, we care, right? We care about treatments and interventions and information that's accurate and helpful. So that's what we're going to be talking about here today. I should probably start here, which is just kind of putting it out there. So everybody has biases, everybody has an agenda. Here are mine. Um, Obviously I'm here because I think Chad has good content and I would like that to get sort of promoted. And in terms of my role, I volunteered with Chad for probably 27 years or something like that, 26 years. I don't know, in various sorts of ways. I've been on the board, I've run support groups for two different local chapters. And for the last, I don't know what, 7 or 10 years, I don't know, I've been sort of one of the chairs of the conference committee. So, like, I have a vested interest in Chad, but it's also all been volunteer. So I've gotten not $1 from my work with Chad. I've written books on adult ADHD. I sometimes get paid to present on ADHD and related things. That's not the case today, but that is a thing I do. Really, most of my, like the vast majority of my income comes from seeing clients in my office. And just generally, I've kind of a moral sense of like, I want to protect people from bad information. Like, it bothers me personally when inaccurate information is harmful to the people who consume it. So that those are my disclosures here. Now, here's the sort of good news, bad news about where we're at in the world. The good news is there's a whole lot more information out there about ADHD, and that's great, right? Since the pandemic, there's been a lot more. I mean, there was a lot before, but especially since the pandemic, there's been a lot more information that's been put out there about ADHD and people, admitting, so to speak, or acknowledging that, like, yes, I have ADHD and here's what I found to be helpful, or this is how it affects me. So that can be really helpful, right? Like putting information out there. Unfortunately, not all information is created the same. Generally, information that's accurate tends to be a lot more helpful than information that's inaccurate, even if the person saying it has good intentions, right? So, like, I believe most of the people who are posting online content are doing it for the right reasons. But just because your intentions are good doesn't mean that it actually helps people. Um, you know, Now, of course, you might make the argument that, like, well, like, whatever, you're just kind of you're wasting people's time in a 30-second video. Who cares? What's the harm? And on the one hand, maybe, right? Maybe you did just waste 30 seconds, and in that case, who cares? But also, spending time doing things that are not likely to be helpful does carry a cost. Right. So if someone suggests some sort of intervention or strategy or system or even a treatment, claim treatment, if it doesn't help your ADHD, it leaves you then to continue to pay the cost of untreated ADHD. Right. So in other words, all the reasons that got you to seek out content in the first place, right? All those struggles will continue to remain. And if we're talking about kids or if we're talking about teens, you only get so many bites at the apple, right? In other words, you only have so many times that you can say, okay, honey, we're going to do this. Like, we're going to try this thing and it's going to help. And if it's a pain in the neck and it doesn't really help, they're going to stop being willing to try the next one, right? So you may waste some of your sort of, let's say, willingness from them on things that don't work. And then they're going to put up a fight on the things that might actually work. Um, but there's also potentially a cost in that, some interventions are actually kind of harmful, right? Certain things that are promoted, kind of alternative treatments, they're not just sort of a waste of time, but they actually have a potential risk to them. So there's that part of it as well that needs to be considered. So what we prefer then, I think here at Chad, but plenty of other people out there in the world, is information that is backed by strong evidence, right? That there's sort of a reason, there's a logic to why this is being, proposed over other things. So if we're talking about ADHD, then, what we would hope for is something that is not just sort of it seems reasonable unto itself, but it also kind of fits into what we already know. So, for example, this fits into what we already know about how we understand ADHD and what interventions work or don't work. But more broadly, it fits into the sort of basics of neurology. And more broadly, even than that, it just fits into the basics of biology, right? So, for example, I somebody forwarded me this email where someone was proposing this natural intervention, and among some other things, one of the interventions was, going at the end of your normal shower, you would turn it to cold. And my first thought is, I think you're suffering enough already. Like life is hard enough. Why add a cold shower to it? But it's also absolutely ridiculous, right? Like there's no way that changing the temperature of your shower is going to change the neurology in your brain, specifically dopamine transmission, primarily in the prefrontal cortex. Like those things don't work, right? Like this will not change that. So we don't need to run experiments to figure out if cold showers might possibly be a treatment for ADHD. We also look for information that it's supported by scientific research, right? It's not just someone saying this works for me or I found this works for other people, but that there's actually like real science behind it. And if you really, really want to get to good research, the gold standard uses placebo-controlled or placebos so that you don't pick up a placebo effect, but also kind of randomized controls, right? Some people get the treatment and some people get the placebo, and let's see what the difference is. We also want to see that research that's done has been peer reviewed, meaning somebody other than the people involved in the study looked at it and said, okay, this looks legit, and that it's then been repeated by other people. And really meaning repeated by people who don't have some sort of a financial stake or some other benefit from finding that, yes, indeed, this thing does seem to be helpful for what it's supposed to help with. Now, the thing about research then is like research is great, like obviously something that has good research is probably more likely to be helpful than something that doesn't have any research. But the thing about research is it tells us about group averages, as in general, for people with ADHD, this tends to be more effective than that. Or maybe if there's more research, right, we might get into subgroups, right? So for kids, it's been found this, but for adults, it's been found that. Or if you have ADHD and also anxiety, this tends to be more helpful than other potential treatments. So it tells us what are the potential benefits, as in general, people found a 37% improvement or something, but also what are the risks and side effects, right? Because every single intervention has potential risks and side effects as well. If someone tells you something has no risks and side effects, the only way to get that is that it has no actual benefits, right? Like you don't get one without the other potentially. Now, having said that, again, research is great. We want research, but you as one person or your kid is not a group average, right? Like ultimately, it doesn't matter what the group average is. If you happen to be that 1 in a million, then that's the thing that matters, right? So individually, you may have a different response than what the research tells us on average, but still, let's start with the most effective treatments before we go to the less effective treatments. Now, the problem, of course, and I'm a clinician. What I do all day is I sit in my office and I see people. Research takes a long time. It takes a long time to do the research, to do all the statistical analysis, and then to get it published. So research can be years, if not sometimes even decades behind, or at least a decade, what people are doing out in the community. And obviously, people want a better life now, right? They don't want to say, okay, well, I'll just suffer for 7 years until this gets proven by the research. So, like, there's always a bit of a tug of war then between what we're doing in the real world and what the researchers are finding to be true or not so true. We make the best decisions we can based on what we know. But this is also part of why we look at, in general, is this consistent with what we already know? Is this something that seems like it has some possibility of being found to be effective? Or is this a thing that seems really unlikely to be found to be effective? Now, there's an old saying, consider the source, right? And it's actually a pretty good saying, right? There is some merit to the idea. So the question then is, like, what does this person have to gain? They're putting this information out there, whether it's, a content creator, a treatment provider, some sort of other entity like a nonprofit or a for-profit company, or the government, like what some government entity. So, are they gaining your attention and clicks? So, like, if you're a content creator, clicks is where it's at, right? Somehow or another, you make money based on the number of clicks that you get, right? And in various ways, that's basically what it is. So the more clicks you make, the more money you have, the more influence, the more opportunities in other ways. Maybe there's something about, do they gain something from you consuming the information, right? What is their agenda in this? Right. And during the pandemic and since then, there's been this big debate about vaccines. Are they good? Are they bad? The science is pretty clear on the answer to that question. But like different political groups have other reasons. There's other benefits to them if you go this way or that way on the vaccine question or on the medication for ADHD question or whatever the topic is. Um, and of course, if you're actually buying something, then they're just, are they benefiting from the dollars? Just plain old cash. That's the benefit. It's okay to have an agenda. Everybody has an agenda, but are they transparent about their agenda, right? Is it clear to you why they're doing what they're doing, right? So if someone is selling you like a coaching program or a medication, obviously we know what their agenda is, but, sometimes they're not so clear, right? So is a content creator getting, money from something, but they don't come out and say, by the way, I've been, endorsed, or I'm endorsing this product and I get, free samples or I get paid or something, right? Like that's an issue because if you don't know what their agenda is and why they have that agenda, you can't make a fully informed decision about, do I take this person's word for it? There's also the question of where their information comes from, right? Are they actually paying attention to the research? Are they aware of what the research is? Or are they primarily speaking from their own personal experience? It's fine to speak from your personal experience, but my hope then would be that you kind of label it as such, right? That you're not claiming to speak from the science and what that tells us. Now, for content creators in particular, then, there's a particular challenge in being a content creator, which is that you got to feed the beast, right? There's always a constant demand to generate new content, whether it's videos or posts of various kinds or whatever it is that you're putting out there. Every day or every whatever, you got to put something new out there. And not just any old thing, but something that's going to get you enough clicks or enough of something, right? Because that's what it's all about, is the clicks and how much money do you make or how much relevance do you have in the community or what else what are the benefits that come from this? If you want a lot of clicks, you got to put out content that either generates some kind of urgency, act now, or you need to know this right now. Maybe there's some optimism, or maybe there's some anxiety and doubt and fear, right? So they can go up or they can go down, depending. The problem with this is a post that just says the standard stuff, like, probably get more sleep, I guess. Nobody's clicking that, right? That post is not going to explode and get forwarded by everybody who sees it, right? What does get forwarded? Things that are much more controversial, that are much more sort of spicy or sexy somehow, something that evokes strong emotions. Either, yes, thank God somebody's saying it, or like, that makes me so mad. Check this crap out, right? Like, strong emotions is what generates all the clicks, but that doesn't mean it's helpful information. And it certainly doesn't mean it's useful or accurate information. So all of this pressure then on content creators, it really drives some posts over others. And any successful content creator is very carefully monitoring the numbers on this click instead of that one, and this color and that one, and these words and blah, 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 right? They are very tuned in because that's what it takes to be a successful content creator. Now, in general, right, there's that old saying, if it's too good to be true, it's probably not true. Agreed. It isn't, right? That if someone is going to make big promises for what this information or this claim or this treatment or this whatever does, give me the evidence, right? Are they explaining what they're basing these promises on? And if their evidence is it works for me, not very convincing. If the evidence is a friend of mine did this, not convincing, or my clients do this, well, again, not convincing, right? Like, give me some real evidence that shows me that there's something to believe in this. And there's just kind of the basic smell test. And like, at the risk of sounding kind of elitist or like a jerk about this, but like, what are the odds that some random person discovered something so incredibly insightful and unique that nobody else ever did that's actually helpful, right? So, like, I saw this post a few weeks ago on YouTube. I didn't click on it because I didn't want to feed it, but like it was some random, I think she might have been a coach. I've never heard of her. Maybe she's brilliant and amazing, but it was not like a Nobel laureate or anything. And it was some video about dopamine or something. And then at the end, in parentheses, it said life changing. And I'm sorry, like, there's no possible way this video is life-changing. Like, at best, interesting, right? Like, maybe I would give her interesting, but it just like, at least for me, it automatically discredited this video and this person as someone who has something useful to say. Like, I don't buy it. So here are some kind of red flags that should automatically raise your suspicion. any Anyone who uses words like revolutionary, transformative, miracle, life-changing, instantly, amazing, like anything, any of these kind of superlatives are incredibly unlikely to ever be true, right? Now, maybe there's something kind of okay. Maybe there's some generally good ideas in there, but like these are super high bars, right? If this was really true, they're not just doing some stupid post on Instagram, right? Like that's not where these kind of big ideas come out. Or alternatively, anything that sort of casts doubt on sort of institutions and common knowledge, right? Any of this conspiracy theory kind of like, they don't want you to know, or big pharma, or big, I don't know, planner, or like Staples doesn't want you to know this because you won't buy a calendar next year, or like any of that stuff automatically questionable, right? Because it's calling into doubt the things that are generally known to be true. Or alternatively, someone who uses extreme cases. Either here's this really amazing thing that happened, or here's a terrible thing. So, like that email I looked at, someone forwarded to me that, recommended cold showers, gave the example of I have a friend and they went to the doctor and they had 100, and their heart rate was 110, and the doctor didn't even say anything about it. Right. And obviously, this is because of their medication. And then the language was, and this isn't even an edge case. This happens all the time. Lying. You are lying. This is absolutely an edge case. Like, this is not a known thing that happens with stimulant medication. If somehow this is a true story, which I doubt, then the problem is the doctor should have figured out why this person's heart rate is so high. And also, if it was that high, It could have been high for a lot of reasons, but we should find out why so that we can do something about it, right? So like scary extreme cases or amazing extreme cases should not be convincing, and yet emotionally we react to them, so they are more convincing than they should be. So let's kind of talk for a few minutes here about what actually causes ADHD. And the reason why, as much as this seems like a simplistic step backwards, this is important because if something doesn't address the cause of something directly, then it's unlikely to actually be of any benefit, right? So if I said, if you rub a potato on your head, that's going to help your attention, nobody is going to run an experiment to see if that's true, right? Because that's attention isn't influenced by rubbing vegetables on your head. So let's talk for a minute here about what is actually known to cause ADHD. Now, it used to be that this would be a much more relevant slide that I might have in a presentation. It's become less relevant because generally people tended to have a better understanding of ADHD. But again, given sort of some of the discussion on the national stage these days, somehow we seem to be calling back to the bad old days. And now this is a slide that actually needs to be shared in a presentation on ADHD. But generally speaking, for the vast majority, for the most part, ADHD is caused by genetics, right? That there's a whole bunch of genes and probably more to be discovered that each contributes some small amount to somebody's likelihood of having ADHD. Mostly they're involved with dopamine receptors or maybe dopamine creation. Mostly it's about dopamine, not only, but kind of mostly about dopamine. But also in general, anything that affects brain development has some potential impact on developing ADHD. So for example, lead exposure during pregnancy or smoking or alcohol, something that happens during birth, something that happens during like the, toddler years or the baby years, right? When there's a lot of brain development going on, has a potential to have some impact on this as well. And generally speaking, anything that affects kind of the prefrontal cortex, meaning this part kind of right behind our forehead, right? That's kind of mostly where it's at. Not only, but that's kind of mostly where it's at. But here's what does not cause ADHD. And this is not just we haven't done the research to find out yes or no. This is like, no, there is research, and the answer is no. Like these do not cause ADHD. ADHD is not caused by bad parenting at all. Like that is not the cause of ADHD. It's not caused by the food you eat or the stuff that's in it. Now, I will grant there's a lot of crap in our food that probably we should have less of, but it doesn't cause ADHD. It might be involved in other things, but it doesn't cause ADHD. Too much screen time. Nope, not that either. Trauma does not cause ADHD. Trauma causes symptoms that can superficially appear to be ADHD, but it does not actually cause ADHD. Brain imbalance, whatever it is that that means, right? This is kind of a thing chiropractors will sometimes talk about. But again, for this to be true, we need to rewrite massive parts of everything we know about neurology. So the entire field of neurology would need to be rewritten for this brain imbalance theory to be turned out to be correct. Vision issues, right? Here's another thing that has been sort of promoted as something that affects ADHD. And here's the problem with some of these things, right? That there is a connection with ADHD in these things, but the causality goes the other way. A hyperactive, impulsive kid who doesn't follow directions is going to stress out any parent, and any stressed out parent is more likely to use negative parenting strategies. That's true. But that kid's not out of control because of his parents. The parents are out of control because of the kid. Or kids with ADHD eat more junky food because, let's face it, it's more delicious and it tastes better in the moment, even though it's not good for you later. So, like, there is a connection, but it's the causality goes the other way from what some of these folks are promoting. In general, right? For all things, ADHD, psychiatry, medicine, car repair, computers, like the correct cause guides the most effective interventions. if you're wrong on the cause, you're going to be ineffective on the treatment. I kind of messed up my shoulder at the gym. I've been going to PT. She spent a bunch of time figuring out like what exactly is wrong here so we could do the right exercises to fix it. Because if I do the wrong exercises, at best, I don't get any better. At worst, I make it worse. So you got to start out with the right idea of what's going on here in the first place. So let's talk about what do you do about it? If you or someone you care about has ADHD, what do we know that's actually helpful? Now, in general, right, and I think this is why TikTok and Instagram and some of the other social media stuff kind of blew up so much over these last years, is that it can feel really great to sort of, I don't know, watch other people talk about stuff that feels similar to your own experience. And especially if you're someone who's been told for kind of most of your life that the stuff you do is for these other reasons, as in you're just not serious enough, or you just need to try harder, or you just need to be more considerate, or whatever that stuff is. And to then realize, oh my God, it's not that, it's this other thing instead, right? That can be really, really helpful to hear other people's experiences that are similar to your own, right? It sort of destigmatizes the struggles and hopefully promotes like a positive acceptance that like I am not alone. There are other people with me in this. And that it can be incredibly powerful. I think it can give a sense of perspective, especially maybe in the beginning if you're feeling overwhelmed of like, okay, these other people seem to be doing okay. They figured a few things out. I think this is going to be okay for me as well. Um, Now the thing about it is, coming to a Chad support group, talking to a friend who also has ADHD, watching some TikTok video, whatever, like it doesn't change the fact that you have ADHD. It doesn't miraculously, give you abilities you didn't have beforehand, but it can definitely change how you feel about it. And that understanding and acceptance and self-compassion is incredibly important and is sometimes as important or more important than the things that you do differently about it. So I do not want to undersell the importance of this. What works for one person may not work for somebody else. And each of us, we need to figure out, like for me at this moment in my life, under these particular circumstances, what's going to be most helpful for me. Um, I'm a big fan of not reinventing the wheel, or another way of putting it is I'm impatient about wasting my time. So I am all in favor of asking other people who have more experience and greater wisdom, like just give me the good answer and then let me take it from there. So like all about it in terms of getting good information from people who know better. Um, Now, especially if you find someone where you're like, I really like what they put out there, like they have great content, or I like their books, or I like their presentations, like this person really gets it. What they say seems pretty relevant to what I'm doing here. That's great, right? Stay with them because it tends to work. But of course, the problem is just because it works for somebody else doesn't mean it's going to work for you. But as humans, we have this natural tendency that we kind of give a little too much weight. We give some extra weight to what somebody else says, right? That they say, I tried this thing and it was terrible. And we're like, oh, that sounds bad. I shouldn't do it. Or they're like, I tried this and it was awesome. It was so good. And we're like, oh, I should do that too. Um, Maybe, right? Like, I'm not saying you don't at all take other people's experience into account, but it doesn't necessarily mean that for good or bad that you're going to have the same experience. So I've kind of made mention of this a few times already, but I think it's important to consider like what is the evidence? If someone is making a claim that something is or is not effective, right? What is their evidence for it? Um, so one possibility here is that the basic theory of this intervention or how this intervention sees the problem is just sort of inconsistent with our existing knowledge, right? So that's kind of like that brain balance thing, or my stupid example of rub a potato on your head, right? Like no research is needed to answer the question of rubbing potatoes on your head treating ADHD, right? It just that's not the case. Or um this thing about like cold showers, right? Like that can't possibly be helpful. So, um, second option is something is generally consistent with what we know to be true about ADHD or neurology or whatever, but we don't yet have enough studies. So we need to kind of wait and see, right? So if a pharmaceutical company comes out with a new medication and they're like, we think this is something that's going to be helpful, the FDA requires them to run a whole bunch of studies under certain specific parameters to show that indeed this is effective. Or if some other intervention is proposed, right? Like maybe it could be helpful, but we're going to hold judgment until we really try it. And then finally, the category we hope for is that, yeah, there's been a bunch of research on this. And yes, indeed, it supports the idea that this is probably going to be helpful. But the thing about it is, it only counts if it's actually good research. So doing a study where there's no placebo control, where there's no random assignment, right? Where you just did a thing where you're like, I had 20 of my clients do this thing where they jump rope for 10 minutes. And then lo and behold, all of them said they paid attention much better afterwards. Well, like that study doesn't tell us anything, right? That doesn't say whether jumping rope is actually an effective treatment for ADHD. Um, so we want research, but it has to be good research. Junky research doesn't actually add up to anything. Um, I sort of mentioned this before, but like personal experience, it's not proof. I mean, it might be proof to you, but it's not proof that it's going to be helpful for other people, right? Does it generalize to other people in their situations? We all have our biases, right? That we're going to see some things as being more helpful and other things as being less helpful. But this is why we do research to confirm indeed that's true. And sometimes it surprises us, right? Where we're like, whoa, that shouldn't have worked, but I guess it did. Um, we all have this thing called, this is like a Psych 101 kind of a thing, but confirmation bias, where the things that support what we believed at first, we grab onto those. We're like, ooh, I knew it. There it is. Yep, that's a thing that I know to be true. Um, that we don't take in all the information equally. So the times where something, let's say, isn't helpful, we may discount those. Or the times when there is a problem or a side effect or whatever, someone might say, yeah, there it is. That's why I don't like it. Um, Whereas if you do your research well, it combines the experiences of a whole bunch of different people. You get rid of some of the biases as much as you can. Researchers try to eliminate all the things that are going to give an inaccurate result. Um, but also, people are people, and you can't run experiments on people that are 100% sort of unbiased. It just can't be done. Um, but this is where we have statistics, right? As much as probably most of us didn't particularly enjoy having to take statistics in high school or college, um, the world is actually better off for statistics. I think many people feel like the world is better off if statistics happen to other people, but um, the statistics help us understand how likely is this to be true. It seems like this thing had an effect. Did it actually? Right? And you do some math and somehow you figure out that like, yeah, this is really likely that indeed that's true. Or actually it looks, maybe it seems like there's something, there's really nothing there. Or you need more people. You can't find this out on 10 people. You need more people than that. So this is why we have statistics, is it helps answer some of these questions with more clarity. Now, one of the places where things get kind of muddled is that something that affects either attention or focus or persistence or maybe more on the emotional side, like motivation or procrastination, right? Someone will say, oh, this affects ADHD, right? And, some of the stuff with, I don't know, like sort of diet and whatever that, if what you eat affects your ability to pay attention or how you feel, okay, well, then that's probably true, but that doesn't mean it affects ADHD. It just affects an aspect of human behavior and existence that also is shared by ADHD. It's sort of like if you had the flu, you wouldn't say, boy, I had really bad ADHD for a few days there. I couldn't focus at all, right? That, like, no, you didn't focus well because you had the flu. Like, that's it, right? That's the end of the story. Um, or possibly sometimes what happens is that it treats some, supposed intervention, treats something that's also happening along with that person's ADHD. So, for example, someone does treatment for trauma, and some aspects of their attention actually get kind of a little bit better. Okay, that makes sense, right? Because we know someone who's had significant trauma, probably that affects their attention. But that doesn't mean it affects ADHD, right? Treatment for trauma treats trauma, it doesn't treat ADHD. And this is sort of the danger of these theories like, ADHD is really just a trauma response, is that you're then proposing an intervention that's really unlikely to be effective, right? Like trauma treatment will not treat the ADHD itself, right? So you're wasting people's time and you're wasting their optimism on something that is going to be ineffective. There are also those interventions that are just kind of good for all people, right? So getting enough sleep, or I don't know, if you have like sleep apnea, getting a CPAP machine, of course you're going to focus better, right? Sleep deprivation makes everything worse. Or eating a healthy diet, or getting enough exercise, or even doing mindfulness, right? Like these are all great. We should all do these things. The problem is if you're not managing your ADHD well, these are even harder to do. Or if in general, you're anxious, you're depressed, you have too much on your plate, there's just too much going on in your life, right? These are the first things to go. So these are good things in a general sense, but they're not treatments for ADHD. There's also this risk of novelty. So, for example, there was this craze a few years ago where it's like, oh, brown noise, use brown noise, it will supercharge your attention, right? And all these people were posting stuff with all these like, oh, kind of amazed faces and stuff. And like, the thing of it is, I'm sure brown noise was really awesome for their attention, like for a day, because it was new, right? Novelty in general tends to kind of kick things up a notch, Um, it's sort of like if I painted my room red for a day or two, I'd be like, wow, this is pretty cool, right? I'd be a little bit more psyched when I came to the office. But after a week, like I don't even see the walls anymore. So the fact that something works for a day or two, like call me in a month, right? Tell me a month from now that it's still actually doing something. Same thing for placebos, right? Things that are just not that helpful. Like, oh, I started taking these vitamins and like, boy, do I feel better. Again, like for a day or two, maybe. But like, again, call me in a month. Tell me in a month if you're really still noticing what you claim to be noticing. So here are the takeaways. Here's kind of like here's what I hope that you sort of remember and kind of like walk away with. So first of all, we're all in this together. We're all doing our part, hopefully, to, in general, maybe make the world a better place, and in more specific ways, to make it a better place for people who have ADHD or other neurodiversity and the people who care about them. So one thing is, do not reward clickbait. Like, don't click things that are just bogus. Um, I see these ads. There's this, I don't know if I should mention the name. There's some company who has these ads with these unbelievably judgy, like procrastination is not a attention thing. It's, I don't know, like a moral failing, or practically they say that. They're just the most awful ads. I never click them because I do not want to reward that kind of nonsense, right? Like, don't click reward bait. It is designed to elicit an emotional response, and clearly it works. Like, don't reward bad behavior. Don't feed the dog when he begs at the table. Don't click stuff that's just nonsense. Um, everybody's got algorithms, YouTube, Instagram, like everything. All this stuff online's got algorithms. So feed it well, right? Search for the right things. Click on the right things. Don't make it an accident what shows up in your feed. And when you find good stuff, like really good content, reward it with your clicks, right? Click the good stuff and then share it with others. And bonus points, tell them why it's worth them clicking on it. This is really great. Let me tell you why, blah, blah, blah. And when you're not sure about something, ask trusted sources, right? This is why Chad exists. This is why a bunch of, like my friends in the world of ADHD, this is why we do what we do, right? Like start with the people who really seem to know what they're doing, who've sort of been at it for a while, who seem to act with integrity and are clear about what they're doing and why. Really, this is about decision making, right? That like I'm sharing all sorts of ideas and stuff, but really it's about you making good decisions for yourself or the people that you care about. And just in general, good decisions are guided by good information, right? Accurate, meaningful information. Part of what I see as my job as sort of an expert in ADHD or someone who does a lot in ADHD is kind of sharing good information, right? I'm constantly sharing stuff with clients or people who get evaluated. I send them like, here, here's some good stuff. Start with this. Um, find the people that you can trust. Ultimately, though, it's still your life, right? Like it's your life, it's your choice. You're the only one who gets to vote on what you do in your life. So, like, you still need to decide. You need to take the information in from all the places that you get it. But, start with the good stuff and then you go from there and you try it out and you figure out for you or your kid or whoever, right? For you, what is going to be the best thing in this situation?